Today we're going to be digging 6 feet down into the tactics of the Nighthaunt. Within Age of Sigmar lore, the Nighthaunt are divided into processions, each led by a powerful spectral figure delivering their souls for Nagash, the Lord of the Undead. Within the game Stormground, the Nighthaunt excel at eliminating individual enemy units one at a time with their powerful artillery, rends, and other forms of disruption. These guys are my favorite warband here in the game, and I've had a ton of success playing them with an extremely aggressive playstyle. This guide is going to focus on multiplayer warband builds for the Nighthaunt, but it is just as applicable to your single player campaigns, seeing what units are high valued and how to build them. Also, I'm going to have timestamps down below, so check out the specific parts of the discussion that you are most interested in. Hope you guys enjoy.
May the procession of souls you lead to Shaiish bring pleasure to your lord Nagash.
Starting with the Lords, the Nighthaunt can be led by either the Knight of Shrouds or the Lady of Ashes. The Lady of Ashes is the weaker choice of the two, but not by much. Her lower durability and basic attack are what hold her back, but she does bring some very interesting tools to the table. Most importantly, she has a burning aura each turn, applying fire to one enemy for one turn within a 2-hex radius. This is an incredible engine of dealing damage or countering aggressive enemy play with their lord in the early game. She also has the unique spell Arcane Claw, doing 2 damage again regardless of armor at range 5, which is frankly incredible for doing executions and being able to continue that theme of focus fire against an individual enemy unit. To build her, you're going to want to make her as durable as possible. I wouldn't worry too much about maxing out her damage the way you do on other lords. She actually has a very unique ability that after a charge, she will gain a health. And this is somewhat equivalent to armor, but it means that if the damage is completely mitigated by your armor, you just get to heal yourself. For skills, you really need to bring in Call to the Dead to be able to have a chance at spawning wisps, because she doesn't have that naturally the way the Knight of Shrouds does. We'll talk about him in a second. And otherwise, you're going to be looking for ways just to be able to keep her in the back, using her aura as a damage engine against your opponent. The Knight of Shrouds is my pick for the best lord in the entire game, and this is coming entirely off of his natural ability to summon wisps. Range 2, and it has the tag Instinct. The unit can move, charge, and activate other abilities after use, can be activated even after other actions have been. So this gives you a lot of versatility. It's basically like what the game also calls second nature for abilities. It gives you so much versatility, and the wisps themselves are incredibly versatile because they can be used as spawn points for the Nighthaunt units or to heal existing Nighthaunt units. This means that you can grab up early positions that are key right around the Wellsprings of Power. You cannot actually drop them right on top of the Wellsprings of Power, but it still lets you get domination over the map in the early game. You can spawn units behind enemy formations. You can catch enemies out. You can heal your own units that are in trouble. Your lord is still able to support your units with this ability, even if he is so damaged that he can no longer be on the front line. This ability is what makes the Knight of Shrouds terrifying. Beyond summoning wisps, the Knight of Shrouds can hold his own against any of the other tank class lords in the game. Build him for as much damage as possible. If you can threaten being able to one-shot enemy units with him, then you are going to have a great time in the early game, so I give him the Spectral Flame, a great sword. I don't love its ability, but the damage that it is providing is just indispensable. For skills, you want to increase his tankiness and his damage. You could do a variant where you throw this damage onto one of your Chainghasts, your artillery pieces, knocking him down to 5, but I prefer to keep all the damage on the Lord if possible. It also makes your Chainghasts a little bit cheaper to deploy, and so you can get some more aggressive early placement of them without loading them up with the weapon mastery. I also throw on Deflect to be able to block that charge damage, making it really a game of cat and mouse with the enemy lord, who is going to go in and throw that first punch onto the Deflect and take the full measure of the counterattack, or who is going to sacrifice another melee unit to be able to break the enemy lord's Deflect. For his unique skills, we have Life Drain. Gaining heal on kill is incredible, especially for these high health armored targets. We also take here Dreadful Defense, +1 armor when charged, and this is armor that you gain after you have taken a charge, so it might not seem at first glance that it is that good, but it is a sneaky overpowered ability. The enemy doesn't have a way to see that you have this equipped, so when they are doing the mental arithmetic as to how much damage is going to take to eliminate the Knight of Shrouds, they're not accounting for it, and unless they have the damage to comfortably overkill your lord, then they are going to miscalculate. You're going to survive and be able to turn things on them in the next turn. We're going to build a tier list of the entire Nighthaunt roster, going unit by unit into builds, strengths, and strategies, starting out here with the Chainghasts all the way up to the S tier. These guys are the premier artillery piece in the game. These guys beat out the Castigators in every single stat category except for cost, which I am totally fine with because they can really bring the pain against your opponents. Equip them with the best equipment you have available, and when you're looking at skills, try and keep them just as cheap as possible. You don't really have any skills that you must put on the Chainghast to be effective. They naturally pierce one level of enemy armor, which makes their damage amazing, and you want to be able to bring them into play as soon as possible. This particular unit is set in the tip of the spear set of units for me, so they have the force multiplier +1 squad summon that only works in multiplayer if it is on your tip of the spear units. If you put it on one of your basic reinforcements, then you are not going to get the benefit from that ability, and to counteract that increase in cost, I am using the summon cost reduction because the breakpoint of having them at 4 cost is really important on a lot of maps. If I am able to rush into the Wellspring of Power as soon as possible, that will give me an early spawn of the Chainghasts and map control forever after. Indirect attack damage is cute, but because these guys naturally penetrate 1 armor on their basic attack, you want to be doing as much direct damage as possible rather than using their indirect attack that is just a little bit less consistent, I have found, and then none of these other ones really speak out as to being very effective. You don't want them channeling something, you want them using their basic attacks, and there is actually a potential build where you would throw Weapon Mastery here, especially on the unit that you're getting the additional summon on. Getting your artillery pieces to 4 damage and they are penetrating armor on top of that means that you just have absolutely overwhelming artillery. The only downside is that then they have the additional cost and are a little bit harder to bring into play in the early game. Whether or not you are okay with taking that sacrifice of damage on your lord and the slightly slower pace in the early game to be able to have this extra damage on your units is up to you. I have seen both builds work very effectively. Heal per turn while isolated is cute, but it is a joke, don't use it. Chainrasp Hordes are next, joining their friends here in the S tier. These are the 2 units that I use in the tip of the spear of my Nighthaunt Warband. Yes, we're going to be going through this tier list, filling it top to bottom, and let's look at these Chainrasps. Oh, all these Nighthaunt unit names are just such a tongue twister. This is going to be a pain. Chainrasps here are meant to be the spammy, swarmy unit of the Warband. In single player, you are actually allowed to summon 2 of them for every set of this unit you equip into your Warband. In multiplayer, at base, you only get 1, so it might seem like they would be underpowered from that, but they are absolutely not underpowered. These guys are a workhorse of a unit. Their base power cost is only 2. That means they cost as much of a unit of Nurglings, but they have the damage of a normal infantry unit, they have armor, they have fine health, and they bring a ton of disruption. They also have a bunch of weapons options. I always only go for the chains. I like these stat lines, and they bring extra disruption, either pulls or pushes respectively. I see plenty of other players bring in the Quelling Malignant Axe because this has the extra damage to make them punch a little bit harder, and this Malign Strike is very cost effective in Aether in terms of what you are getting here. You're bringing in the Quell is the key piece here. Reducing an enemy damage by 2 for 3 turns is pretty insane. Getting the 2 damage is a nice little, frosting on the top of that Quell. So I see people use that successfully, but I personally like only going for the chains. On the skills here, in multiplayer, keep them bare bones, super light. In single player, this is a place where the build diverges. You can stack a bunch of armor on these guys, and because you get 2 summons out of every one that you equip, you're getting double duty on the skills that you equip here. So my favorite build is I have a skill that gives me +2 armor, and then another skill that gives me +1 armor, leading to a 4 armored Chainrasp unit. If you put the reduced summon cost skill on this as well, then he only costs 3 power to bring out. He is basically immortal with 4 armor against the AI in the single player. It is hilarious to watch them try and fight what are supposed to be chaff units but have turned into this impregnable fortress. Absolutely love that build. But in multiplayer, your key is bringing their disruption and their natural skill, being able to rend 2 enemy armor at a channel, long range. I feel like to balance this, if the enemies move out of range, they should break the rend, but as it is, you can just focus in so much damage onto units that your opponent thinks is safe because they are protected by armor, especially the enemy lord. The enemy lords always bring armor until your Chainrasps just strip it all away. Incredible tool out of a very cheap and cost-effective unit. Back on the tier list, we have our first Assault class unit, the Dreadblade Harrows, who is going to be slotting into the A tier, starting to round out our warband here. This Spectral Rider gets a ton of work done, and it is unfortunate that he is competing with your Lord for his weapon slots, so it means that here I am giving him the Resilient Greatsword, whereas the Spectral Flame Greatsword would be better but is reserved for use of the Knight of Shrouds. If you just slot your Knight of Shrouds into a tankier build, say you take away his skill of adding power and put that on the Chainghasts, then I would probably put the Spectral Flame Greatsword onto the Dreadblade Harrows and just embrace that my Knight of Shrouds is not going to do as much damage. So you can switch those around and see a lot of success. For skills, this guy turns into a monster when he has Relentless, because when you summon him, he will rend enemy armor for any adjacent enemies. So you can rend their armor and then immediately punch them in the face, doing basically 5 damage with this build then, which is enough usually to snipe out units, catch them in a very disadvantageous trade. And I just unlocked this. Putting Overrun on him turns this even more into your favor. After you get a kill from a charge, you replenish your movement and it allows you to charge again, so you get 2 stacks of Relentless is what this means. This means you get an extra stack of Relentless every time you score a kill, and it is amazing. My understanding is this is effectively endless. You could continue chaining kills with the Dreadblade Harrows and keep on replenishing because it doesn't say once per turn. I have not had too much experience using this, and the situation is going to be extremely rare where you would chain multiple kills anyway, so don't really count on that, but just getting that double punch if you finish off a unit, or just being able to finish off a unit and then use all of his movement to be able to get away into a safe position is so valuable. The only other skill that I think really bears mentioning here is putting the summon cost reduction onto him and then potentially slotting him into your set of tip of the spear units to make sure that you get him for that rend and burst damage early trade. But I prefer being able to set up my Chainghasts early on and then just wait to draw him to be able to spring him on my opponent. And so then I leave off the summon cost reduction because I'm going to be getting him a little bit later in the game when I should be able to afford him anyway. The Lord Executioner is next, joining the Dreadblade Harrows here in the A tier. This guy is considered a mini-boss if you fight against the Nighthaunt in the campaign, and for good reason. He is insane. He's got several abilities here: Mark for Death, synergizing with your Stalkers, Executioner, doing a bunch of damage for your Aether, but the true skill here that he is going to be iconic for is Summon Gallows. This skill is so good that I always make sure to have the Aether banked up so that on his very first turn, he will be able to bring the Gallows into play. As for skills, it's really simple here. You get the upgrade to the Gallows. This allows the Gallows to attack twice a turn. So the Gallows ability is that at the beginning of your turn, they will launch an attack doing 2 damage to an enemy within a 3 space radius regardless of armor. Here, you are doing that attack twice. It can potentially hit the same enemy unit, or it can be split. It is totally random who the Gallows target, but they're doing so much damage that even though it is random, it is still going to do a lot of work for you. This guy really serves the purpose of being your end game engine damage dealer to help you win the game once things go late, even if the enemy staves off your early aggression. The Guardian of Souls, the wizard class for the Nighthaunt, is next, and it is very hard to rank him because in his current state, he is very buggy. I'm gonna throw him in the B tier here, and let's talk about why. The Guardian of Souls by default brings Dispel and Tome of Control as his spells. Neither of these are honestly that exciting. Dispel is good against Nurgle, but otherwise dispelling effects on units I haven't found to be too important. Against Stormcast, the idea is that you could break the guard status of extra armor on particular units, but I really don't find myself using it very much because as Nighthaunt, I never have very much banked up Aether. Tome of Control is nice, being able to apply that fear. It's a channeled ability at a decent range, and being able to kind of split an enemy unit off from their formation. Also, while they are feared, they cannot counterattack, so it makes them fall prey to your attacks very easily. It does not work against Nurgle units standing on top of Corruption. I don't know if this is explicitly stated anywhere in the game, but it has always been my played experience that that is how it works. It kind of makes sense that standing on top of Corruptions means that they are immune to psychological effects. I just wish that it was in a tooltip somewhere. Now we come to his aura, Soul Beacon. Every single wizard in the different factions has a unique aura, and that is supposed to kind of be the hallmark of their wizard class. And the auras of the other wizards are extremely powerful. His is supposed to, on each turn, restore 1 health to allies in a 2 hex radius. The problem is it is bugged in multiplayer and rarely, if ever, works. In single player, I have seen this be effective, so when you're building your single player warband, snap up this Guardian of Souls. He is going to give you so much extra durability. In multiplayer, this is almost reason to leave him off the warband entirely, because what is he really going to do if he is not healing your units with this aura? Well, he's going to be casting these spells and nothing else, because with 1 damage, you're never going to throw him into a fight. With 1 armor and 5 health, he can maybe slow down the enemy advance, but you might as well throw in another unit of basically anything in this place if you are not using the spells. So what are your other spell options? Well, outside of the Tome of Fear here, you have all of the spells that the wizards generically have access to. You also get Healing Souls here, Summon a Wisps, 3 Aether, range 3. It will restore 3 health or grant additional bonuses from skills. This is too expensive to be useful. I don't think you should ever use this. Because I like to play such a high tempo game with my Nighthaunt, I actually leave Tome of Fear on here because the Fear is only 3 Aether, and that is a cheap enough spell that I can potentially use it in the early to mid game. A lot of these other spells are either slow paced like Generate Power or Generate Aether, or they are extremely expensive like the Purple Sun here, and can serve as a really late game engine piece. Now you could have him as that kind of late game assurance of being able to get in there with a powerful spell once the enemy has built up a large formation if they have weathered your early game aggression. So I could see you being successful doing that, but I just prefer having his spells kind of play into my early aggression play style. Your real differentiation comes here in your weapon choice. You can bring in the Banshee Dagger, and then this will give you the Chilled to the Core ability, which is pretty cheap. It does decent damage and it slows down the enemy movement. That's definitely an option. The real key here is that it opens up the Lantern slot, and the Nighthaunt have some pretty insane lantern slot options here. So you can get some crazy lanterns here that when they activate will summon Chainrasps. You can get different unit types here that summon here with even later game unlocks. They're very expensive. They activate slowly. They're going to require a lot of wisps to be able to be dumped into them to activate. But if you can finagle being able to pop out extra free Chainrasps, yeah, sign me up. You've also got the Resilient Hourglass here, which deals damage and then also heals you, so it's vampiric. It's too expensive to be useful, though. In general, I think these really expensive pyres are just too slow-paced for the way that I like to play my Nighthaunt, so I leave the Resilient Scepter on there, and then I do have the Dispel to be able to counter the Nurgle matchup, breaking up their corruption and keeping them from getting all of those nasty bonuses that the corruption gives. So I bring the Dispel because it is moderately useful, and then I don't find myself using the pyres anyway. Looking at the Bladegheist Revenants, the game gives you a bunch of these in your starter warband, expecting them to, or at least it seems like they're expecting these guys to be a staple of your warband, but really, they feel like they are just an extra cost added onto a Chainrasp Horde. As you can see here, my multiplayer warband has completely eliminated the Revenants from it, but let's talk about what they are able to do. Their stat line is not very exciting. They are supposed to be pretty frail, but then use these Frenzy abilities on summon, apply +1 damage for 1 turn to adjacent allies to kind of give them this overwhelming damage wave against you, but it is really hard to get off and be effective. Giving Frenzy for only 1 turn wears off so quickly that you don't get that much benefit out of it, and then they are also competing for weapon slots with both your Lord and the Dreadblade Harrows, so these guys aren't going to get any good weapons being able to be given over to them. They are locked to only this greatsword option. They have a couple unique skills here that are pretty interesting. You can get the Rend on Charge, meaning that you can cut through that enemy armor, but they're going to be suffering a lot of damage on that counterattack. They're so frail, you're probably not going to get this off very often. And then you also have Legions of Death here, an aura that applies +1 damage to adjacent allies. Do not be fooled, this is not all allies. It applies to additional Bladegheist Revenants only. So, if you want to play with a lot of this frail subpar unit, you can make them hit harder. It's just too much of an investment for me to see this ever working, to run a bunch of Revenants and try and play off of the Frenzy to get a lot of damage working together. You might be able to try something. Let me know if you guys have tried it and what it has done for you. I could see you building Legions of Death on one of your units, getting Frenzy on another unit, so that as you are not Frenzy, Relentless. So you spawn somebody in, And then you have the aura, the frenzy, everybody is doing more damage, and this guy that you just spawned is also able to immediately attack, and you try and like pick off a few kills. But I would much rather just play my my Chainghasts and kill enemies from far away rather than having to run up with their squishy bodies on these Revenants. We're coming to the end of the list of the Nighthaunt units here with the Glaivewraith Stalkers. I'm putting them down all the way in the C tier. Scouts just feel very weak to me. These Stalkers here are a Scout class unit, which means that they can detect traps and indirect fire from 1 hex away. This is probably the most useful thing they do because, as you see on their stat line, they only have 1 base damage. They have decent armor, low health, and then really good movement, so they can get around pretty fast. It means that they can quickly get around and do nothing with only 1 damage. Traps are just bad. They are so inconsistent. Enemies pretty much never walk on them. It's very telegraphed where you place the trap because you see the animation of them dropping the trap, and the enemy's always going to be able to avoid that if they want to, and its benefit is honestly not that big if they do step on it. You have some that you can trigger yourself, which are a little bit more effective. Those would probably be the only ones that I use rather than the Curse of Death here. Their Glaive Strike is supposed to be the moneymaker. It's Aether efficient for the damage it does, and you can get iterations where you're able to stack on Marked for Death. These guys are also going to synergize with the Lord Executioner, he can at range apply Marked for Death stacks, and then that will increase their damage, which is always going to ignore armor. So the game developers' idea here was that these would be this elusive unit that you keep on the wings. They're just too expensive for the enemy to track down, so they get multiple turns of setting up and then they come in to execute somebody. But the thing is that that setup rarely ends up happening, and when it doesn't come together, they just do absolutely nothing with only 1 damage here. It is too bad because they gave us plenty of variety of traps, none of which are good, and then you have several skills that are unique to the Stalkers and I guess the Scout class in general that allows them to have some fun extra toys, but it just really doesn't get off the ground for these guys. The last unit we have to talk about here is the Myrmourn Banshees. They are pretty hard to rank for me, but I'm going to put them up here in the B tier. They are one of the Scout class units that I actually find useful. The Banshee's value comes entirely from their ability Siren's Call. On death, explode, dealing 2 damage and knockback. Allowing you to do this area damage. The knockback will often do additional damage to the enemy units. This pairs so beautifully with the Knight of Shrouds ability to drop out the wisps, and then you can put the Banshees right in the enemy's face, put them in the middle of their formations, throw out as much disruption as possible. If the enemy doesn't want to eat this horrible Siren's Call, then you can use your abilities here, Chill to the Core, drop out traps, try and disrupt their formation even more while you have the Banshees around, but really your goal here is to get them to die as soon as possible. They don't really have any different equipment that you can bring in. They do have a couple different abilities. The only one that I find useful here is Buckling Screech. This is going to augment your Siren's Call, giving you the armor piercing on it so that that can be as effective as possible. In single player, I have found a few skills that turn them into more of a support unit, but I really don't want them around supporting my guys. I want them in the front lines, blowing up in the enemy's faces, so I don't find adding that extra cost to the Sirens really worth it. Here is the full Nighthaunt unit tier list. Honestly, just give me an army entirely comprised of Chainghasts, Chainrasp Hordes, and the Knight of Shrouds, and I'll be happy. I'll be winning games. These other units here, the Dreadblade Harrows and the Lord Executioner, are really good pieces. I do enjoy using them. And then as we start falling down here, these are the fill-in units that I will use in single player if I do not have a replacement, or that I will use as one-offs in my multiplayer warband in the terms of the Banshees. And the Guardian of Souls, oh, if his healing aura worked, he would be ranked so much higher. He can also be a key piece if you really like using some of those high-powered spells and you play for having enough Aether to be able to bring them out. Now let's talk about builds for your warband. So when you just start out in multiplayer, you're going to be looking at something quite like this. This is also going to be applicable in single player when you're looking at drafting units and what units you are going to slot in and replacing other units. So when you're looking at this, this is fine. You can still get a lot of work done out of your Chainrasp Hordes, being able to catch enemy lords out early on, especially players are not used to diving all in on their lord. They like to play very arrogantly with their lord is what I found, because they put their best equipment on it and they think he's invincible, but he is definitely not when he suddenly has all of his armor removed. Once you start unlocking units, I'm not sure of the exact order here, but we're going to look at what you replace first. So you drop the Stalkers right off the bat, and then I think that the unit that you have able to bring in is the Banshees. This gives you a little bit more variety. The Banshees, as I said, are kind of take it or leave it, but I do like using them. Then we are going to look at dropping the 2 Revenants. And the replacements here, I think, are the Dreadblade Harrows, and we unlock the Guardian of Souls. If only the Guardian of Souls aura worked, but I think that his spells do warrant inclusion here. Finally, we are going to drop off a Chainrasp Horde to be able to bring in the Lord Executioner. This is trading a really early game piece for a powerful late game engine. And that's the thing with the Chainrasp Hordes, is that getting them early feels super good. You get to put them down very cheaply and get a lot of work out of them. But in the late game, if you draw one of them late, then it just does not feel very impactful to put one down. I find I get enough Rends and Disruption out of just 2 of them. And the late game engine that is the Lord Executioner with his Gallows is just so good. It is a dramatic upgrade to be able to bring him in. I have been tangentially talking about tactics this entire video, but to bring everything together here, you are going to want to play as aggressively as possible with your Nighthaunt. Position the Knight of Shrouds as forward as possible, throw wisps out early on to be able to capture the wellsprings of power, and then set up your Chainghasts to deliver devastating artillery blows from the high ground. Look to break up the enemy formation with either Banshees or the Dreadblade Harrows, and always be looking for opportunities to dive in and eliminate enemy units, especially their lord, with the Rends and the disruption that the Chainrasps provide. If you find the enemy turtling around their soul prison, they are going to be very hard for you to crack with your early game units. So go ahead, give yourself permission to take things into the late game, utilize your Chainghasts as effectively as possible to lock the enemy into that position, just right around their soul prison. If they venture out, make sure that they will be met with a withering artillery barrage. Hold on to the wellsprings of power to pull in as much extra resources as possible so that you can set up your late game pieces, being the Lord Executioner, Guardian of Souls, and Dreadblade Harrows, for success with their powerful spells. Set up the Gallows to start wearing the enemy down. Use the Dispel and the Fear to potentially pull enemies away from their guarded position, and use the Dreadblade Harrows' final charge to secure victory. That wraps things up for this awesome warband. If you want to see more tactics in action and hear me talk through entire games, then check out the videos that I have linked in the description. As I said, I have had a ton of success with these guys. They are my favorite faction. I love playing them every chance I get. Comment down below how you have found success playing as the Nighthaunt, and subscribe if you want to see more videos from me. Thank you guys for watching, and have a good one.